Hello everyone. In this fifth talk, I would like to focus on the relationship between experience, body, and context. So let's begin with this question. Why do experiential processes interest semiotics? The semiotic processes that constitute the experience have aroused a growing interest in the sciences of signification because they perform semiosis in which and through which the subject interacts with the world. The social and cultural interaction is carried out effectively in the experiential processes. These are complex and dynamic phenomena whose study requires an interdisciplinary vision so that its analysis and systematization be as complete as possible. For semiotics, whose interdisciplinary vocation is essential to its definition, experiential phenomena pose enormous challenges, so it must rely on the contribution of other disciplines. A semiotic of experience will make us get out of the traps and limitations of the text, which in turn claims an anthroposemiotics view and the need for a theory of context. The semiotic study of experiential processes should be articulated to the study of processes such as memory building. So in 2004, Eric Landowski proposed, I quote, "The constitution of a semiotics anchored in the day-to-day experience of the subjects that we are. In other words, inscribed in the life itself as a search for meaning." End of quote. Even Jacques Fontanille, another of the heirs of the structuralist and Gramscian tradition, has recognized the new path that semiotics must undertake. Semiotics of experience, practices, ways of life, and ways of existence, among others, whose theoretical and methodological coherence is about to be built, offer an opportunity to face the challenges that are presented to semiotics. End of quote. In this research, we start from a phenomenological vision to relate the concept of experience and body, understood as fundamental components of the processes of sense generation, the semiogenesis. In this regard, we propose to review the main authors who have addressed the subject studied here today. Later on, I will make a proposal that places the concept of experience, body, signification, and context in an analytical and integrative relationship. Because it is an attempt to outline some prolegomena, it is necessary to review a set of concepts and contributions that we try to integrate into a vision of experience as a phenomenon, as a semiotic phenomenon. Let's begin with the phenomenological view that characterizes my research, as I said in my previous talks. A phenomenological view would greatly contribute to addressing experiential processes, as it would avoid the decontextualization of the processes of meaning that in the world constantly the subjects build. Maurice Merleau-Ponty said that, I quote, "Experience anticipates a philosophy. Philosophy is nothing but an elucidated experience. It is there that the semiotic of experience is also situated. It is a project of elucidation of the dynamic and complex processes of semiogenesis that in the framework of the world of life they emerge in by from the dialectical experiential processes." The term experience is multivocal or polysemic, we might find at least 5 meanings. Having felt, known, or witnessed something. Second, prolong a practice that provides knowledge or ability to do something. 3, knowledge of life acquired by circumstances or lived situations. 4, circumstance or event lived by a person. And 5th, experiment. As you can see, these meanings are based on notions of experience as practice, knowledge, circumstance, or experiment. None of them propose a semiotic notion in terms of, for example, the inclusion of the idea of meaning. And yet, one could say that every one of these definitions suppose the concept, the idea of meaning. Experience and semiosis. Merleau-Ponty clearly explains the relationship between experience and semiosis in a paragraph that shows us the inseparable and close interaction between one and the other. I quote, "Whatever the transformation that have finally given us the word and the concept of consciousness as a language acquisition, we have a direct means of accessing what that designates. We have the experience of ourselves, of this awareness that we are. It's about this experience that all the meanings of language are measured, and it is she who makes just the language tell us something. It is therefore in the experience of being ourselves in the world where the processes generator of the meanings of language, that is to say semiosis, are realized and perceived. It is there where they measure themselves, and at the same time it is the experiential processes that fertilize the signification processes of language. Hence, the need to turn our eyes to such processes, a heuristic and theoretical movement that has already been advanced by some authors. Experience and body and meaning. Let's say to begin that all experience is a bodily experience. Body and experience are inevitably in a close symbiotic relationship in the framework of the world of life where subjects interact and live. I quote Waldenfels, "The bodily experience takes us to a time, place from which we experience the world and ourselves in the middle of the world." End of quote. Moreover, as stated by Edelin and Klinkenberg, the body is the terminus a quo, the starting point of semiotics and experiential operations, a condition derived from its quality as a term essential to all semiosis. All the semiogenetic processes are born from the body and all return to it, or, in their own words, I quote, "Born of the corporeality of experience, semiosis return to this other corporeality that is the action." Let's talk about the carnality of the body. Now, in the face of the traditional predominance of the soul, spirit, or mind, both in philosophy and religion, it is essential to recover the carnality of the human body. It is necessary to recover the centrality and carnality of the body, its leading role in the world of life, from where semiogenetic processes are endlessly built. Naturally, the corporeality is not limited to the carnality of the body, because it also includes the imaginary representation and languages that he assumes in concrete historical conditions, of which inevitably it is tributary. A semiotics of experience must redeem the historical condition of the body, but at the same time the bodily condition of the history. And in this dialectic between body and history, semiotics has a theoretical and methodological role that cannot be avoided if it does not want to remain secluded in the limitations of the text. In this vision of the body, it is essential to incorporate a dialectical approach. Then, as it is stated by the phenomenological perspective, the body is not an isolated entity in the world, nor is it simply inhabiting it. On the contrary, the body is conceived, born, it grows and dies in a permanent intersemiotic action with the world, which has led Merleau-Ponty to define the body as a set of lived meanings. On the other hand, it is from, in, through, to the body where the structures of the world of life are gestated, realized, transformed. It is in the dialectic between body and world where vivencies and experiences are defined and redefined endlessly. These are processes where the subjects in confrontations and dialogue carry out continuous operation of election, differentiation, and grouping, of discarding hierarchy and updating, in the continuous search to build equilibriums, always provisionals, that make sense of the relationships between the living subject and the lived and living world. To advance in a semiotic of experience project, some basic key concepts present in the genesis of any semiotic process should be revisited. We suggest rediscussing the concept of signification and meaning in order to see the experiential dimension and in order to revisit other contributions, not only of semiotics itself, but also from disciplines such as philosophy. Signification, for example. When referring to signification, Greimas and Cortés defined it by opposition to the concept of sense. I quote, "A first delimitation of the semiotic field covered by the signification is obtained opposing it to meaning, opposing signification and meaning. That is, reserving this last term to what is prior to the semiotic production. Meaning will be defined as the articulated sense." The concept of meaning proposed by Greimas and Cortés would belong to the paradigm. Therefore, as they affirm, it is prior to semiotic production. Consequently, it is acontextual, what in our opinion restricts the concept. However, it is important to underline the differential and dynamic character suggested in the definition. And I quote, "We reserve the term signification for what seems essential to us, that is to say, difference to production and to realization of the intervals." So keep in mind this concept, difference, because I will talk about later. Landowski will complement the concept of difference with that of relationship and will postulate, I quote, "the principle of epistemological primacy of the relationship over term," a well-known principle that has been used by the structuralist theory. Consistent with that definition of signification, Greimas and Cortés will say, I quote, "The semiotic theory must be presented, first of all, for what it is, that is, as a theory of the signification. Therefore, your first concern will be to explain in the form of a conceptual construction the conditions of the assumptions and the production of meaning." Let's talk about that. It is to these conditions of the assumption and the production of meaning traditionally postponed and even ignored by semiotic theory, at least in the so-called semiotic of text, to which, among other capital aspects, a semiotic of the experience should pay its fullest attention. Conditions of assumption and production designate the multiple contextual variable involved in the semiogenesis. Numerous definitions have been given about meaning. Saussure defined signifier, opposed to signifiant, as the concept that a sign represents and communicates. The Persian school also defines meaning as an interpretant, that is, as, I quote Merrill, as the effect produced by a sign in the semiotic agent's mind that receives it and subjects it to the interpretation process. Umberto Eco defines meaning as a cultural unit. I quote, "So, what is the meaning of a term? From the semiotic point of view, cannot be anything other than a cultural unit." So we have three definitions that I just wanted to remind before continuing my presentation. The concept of meaning has also been a privileged object of study for philosophy. From a phenomenological perspective, Schutz and Lachmann discuss the problem of meaning, or as they call it, significativity. And I quote, "All experiences and all acts are based in the structures of significativity. The problem of signification is perhaps the most important and at the same time the most difficult to solve for the description of the world of life." End of quote. For Sanchez Soberano, the signification, or Bedeutung in German, indicates that our relationship with the world is based primarily on the understanding of the significant links that articulate the reality. In interpretive philosophy, the meaning depends on the scenario. I quote, "The meaning of the science depends on our interpretive practice that can be understood as the concrete scenario where the meaning are established," said Abel. However, in this vision, the interpretive practice resembles to the context, concrete scenario, which in our opinion are two different domains because such practices are related to the action of the subject, while the concrete scenarios would correspond to the situations and circumstances, to historical, present, past, and glimpsed variables where such practices are located. For the German hermeneutist and philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey, meaning is the vast category with which, I quote, "life becomes understandable." Meaning is the vast category with which life becomes understandable. And he adds, I quote, "The sense of life results of meaning." A proposal further explained as, I quote, "The category of meaning designates the relationship of the part of life with the whole, a relationship that is founded in the very being of life. We possess that connection only through memory." A new concept, he adds, memory, in which we can cover our life past course with our eyes. With this, the meaning reaffirms its validity as a form of apprehension of life. I like this quotation because it adds the concept of memory to the idea of meaning and experience. Here, Dilthey established some fundamental ideas of his conception of meaning. On the one hand, it is an experiential category capable of relating elements, which he called parts, with the totality, which he called the whole, a precursor principle developed extensively and intensively by the structuralist theory. On the other hand, Dilthey affirms that the inseparable relation between the part of life and the whole are grounded on memory. Then the German philosopher affirms that basic semiotic principle according to which experience, vital manifestation, is assigned and consequently is inevitably marked by a meaning that also points in various ways to the meaning of life. And he said, all vital manifestation has a meaning in that as a sign it expresses something, and as an expression it indicates towards something that belongs to life. For a semiotic approach to experiential processes, the Dilthian model of meaning and the vital manifestation requires completion with the model of intertextual relationship that will ultimately fertilize such manifestation. That is, experience would not be analyzable, relatable to the world of life and interpretable in their framework of historical variables without recourse to context. The generation of meaning. For Edelin and Klinkenberg, the fundamental process of constitution of meaning consists of, I quote, the regrouping of abundant experiential facts for the purpose of economy, uniting, but in increasingly different spaces for purposes of efficiency, divide. Remember these two concepts that I will also refer to, unite later on, uniting and divide. Well, this definition does not explicitly refer to the context, probably suggests that in expression spaces each time different. They are explicitly referred to in the 2006 Klinkenberg text, where he says, I quote, "It's always a context, that is, a set of particular associations that give the sign status to an object. A sign is never a sign, but for some given people in a given context." The reading of the Principia Semiotica from Edelin and Klinkenberg shows the decisive importance of the context in the operation and devices of the semiosis, and suggests that the use of context is not a mere complementarity of another text, but a fundamental component of the organization of the semiosis of experience. I quote, "Semiosis, far from being a phenomenon without links with the body, get its origin from this. And this aspect of the corporeality of meaning could not be approached except through the interactions it maintains with his context." Recently, Kalevikul has defined, the Russian semioticians, has defined the semiosis in the following way. I quote, "We define the sign process, production of meaning, through the concept of choice. Semiosis is the process of making choices between simultaneously present options. In the same direction, called define learning and memory as follows. We define semiotic learning as the traces left by the traces of the election, which can include new elections. These elections traces will be called memory. So in Kuhl we find the selection as defining operation of semiosis, which would mean the transformation of the order of the paradigmatic to the order of the syntagmatic, which will correspond to the selection and combination operations proposed by Roman Jakobson. In the light of the three cited proposals, it is possible to build a model of the production of meaning, semiogenesis, which articulates them in a heuristically profitable and non-contradictory way. How to interpret a new paradigm that articulates the concept of different, from Cremasa and Cortés, union and division, Edelin and Klinkenberg, and choice, proposed by Cole. In our opinion, it is possible to articulate the three proposals we have seen so that they explain in one comprehensive way, at the same time global and analytical, the complex processes of generating meaning. As Gremas and Cortés say, signification is given in the realm of semiotic differences, grouping similar traits and separating the different one, and it is in that dialectic of joining and separating, as Edelin and Klinkenberg says, where the selections operate, as Cole says. But, as we have argued, such processes that relentlessly articulate and re-articulate the meaning of the world of life are only updated within the framework of the multiple contextual and historical variables that intervene to fertilize this semiogenesis. Therefore, it is essential to place these operations, these three operations that the authors I mentioned refers to, in the context where semiogenesis occurs, context from which the text, whatever form they assume, cannot escape. A model like this tries to represent in an analytical and comprehensive way the variables involved in semiogenesis in the general framework of the world of life. I'm sorry, I apologize, it is expressed in Spanish, but I think it is very easy for you to interpret what I'm doing here. So I'm in a triangle, I'm trying to put in every angle the proposition of the three authors I have cited before. Uniting and separating, the top of the triangle, proposed by Edelin and Klinkenberg, and the left angle we see differentiating, as proposed by Gremas and Cortés, and in the right angle of the triangle, selection, as proposed by Cole. I've added the context, because as I said before, context are the elements, the variables that fertilize semiosis. And I have included in this triangle the body, the experiential processes, and semiosis as the general basic process of signification that semiotics deals with. All of this is related to the world, to the structures of the world of life, a term that I have mentioned here before. So I think it is a good idea for you to try to use this model as an orientation device to study processes of semiogenesis. Let's talk about the context. And I refer to anthropology, but also to some linguists about the original idea of context. Just as a reminder, the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, referring to verbal language, pointed out in 1923 that, I quote, "Neither the word nor the meaning have an independent and self-sufficient existence. The language is essentially rooted in the reality of culture." This idea can be projected also to all kind of semiotic process. Charles O'Kane, Oden, and Ivor Armstrong Richards proposed the concept of sign situation as part of contextual theory of the sign, which is related from a different perspective with the proposal of Malinowski. So you can relate the proposal from Malinowski from the cultural anthropology and the linguistic proposal from Ogden and Richard and see that they complement. But how to define the context from a semiotic point of view? Gremas and Cortés distinguish, on the one hand, between implicit context, defined as, I quote, set of texts that precede and or that accompanies the syntagmatic unit considered and on which the signification depends, and situational context corresponding to the semiotic of the natural world. So Germán and Cortés distinguish two kinds of contexts, syntagmatic and situational context. For other theorists, particularly from the Gramscian school, so based in the textual semiotics, the context is just another text, as Floch says in 1993. Even more, Fontanille adds that this, I quote, discourse does not need context, because it is the text that invents it, which would be understandable if with that term Fontanille refers to what Gramsci and Cortés call implicit context. For Landowski, the context is a language among others. You see that in this expression they do not talk about the cultural, historical, political variables where a text is placed. Is that what I call context? We believe that it is insufficient to consider the context, the historical, situational, circumstantial, as another text. In our opinion, to view the context as a text will reduce it to the same textual dimensionality, a vision that ignores that the context has a different operational quality. Defining the context as another text leads to see it as a complement or as an additive. It would mean restricting the richness of variables in the structures of the world of life. Variables to which we refer are ontologically different from the text, which does not prevent seeing them as particular semiotic objects, that is, analyzable in its specific dimensions. In conceiving the context as another text and not qualitatively distinguishing them, it is as we were saying that the entire universe is text, without discriminating between the qualities of the variety of texts that are built up. The relationship between text and context is one in which the second makes it possible for the first to go from a virtual existence to a historical realization. That transforming quality forces us to rethink and redefine the relationship between text and context, between semiotic structures in itself and semiotic structures for itself, relationship in which the second fertilizes the first one, that those are placed in a new semiotic dimension that is only explained if we project both concepts about the world of life, a macro variable that encompasses text and context. So we suggest to consider context as a set of historical variables of diverse nature which intervene in the experiences made by the subjects in certain circumstances and situations of the world of life. Such variables affect the semiosis of experience and experiential processes. It is possible and necessary, in my opinion, to classify the various types of context that their study and consideration contribute to improving the process of interpretation, which in general is specifically useful in heuristic processes, and in particular it is decisive in studies of interculturality, a condition that defines today's contemporary societies and cultures. Let's talk about the dialectical relationship in the processes of semiosis of experience. For a definition of the dialectical processes of semiosis, typical of semiotic of the experience, the notion of dialectical equilibrium is important because it puts us facing the need to see and interpret the world lived and being lived as organized by dynamic processes of opposition, confrontation, and conflicts that we will call polemic processes. For an experience to be in equilibrium, even if it is mobile and provisional, it is necessary that the perceiving subject of a set of sensations attribute a provisional meaning, a transitory part of the particular and specific processes of meaning construction. That meaning is the result of provisional balances that allow subjects to resolve contradictions and oppositions. As James said, the great philosopher, in one way or another, life, by displaying its resources, finds the way to give satisfaction to opposite at the same time. I think that this quote is very interesting. So this expression of satisfaction to opposite, I think, relies very well to the idea of having the relationship of opposite, of contradiction, of the polemic condition of the signification process. So the phrase satisfying the opposite clearly expresses what that dialectical condition that characterizes the semiosis within the framework of the world of life, where synthesis, total or partial, are part of the meaning-making processes. Two levels could be distinguished in sensitive processes: physical matter, the signals, and physical form, the signifiers. These two levels make possible the generation of conceptual forms, meanings. If in a first approximation the signals does not contribute meanings to the experiential processes, at least they provide information, because according to the information theory, they reduce uncertainty. In sensitive processes as well as in perceptual ones, operations intervene to dialectically convert the continuous into discrete. Sensitive and perceptual processes are operations that, in the chaos and disarray of physical signals, seek to discover similitude and differences, to then introduce an order, an operational logic capable of grouping, separating, and identifying. In the analysis of the construction of meaning, it is necessary to find the discrete in the margin of what is continuous, and conversely, the continuous in the margin of the discrete. In that incessant dialectic, typical of the generation of meaning in the unstable frames of the world of life, is where finally semiosis emerge. So I have made this model, which is a little bit complex, but I'm trying to present here two kind of levels: the level of body with qualias, sensorial processes and perceptual processes, and the world of what I call reality, where causes, occurrences such as sensation, perception, meanings, and accumulation works, and where two or three or more type of memory occurs within different kind of context, and where, according to this different kind of context, where sense appears, always relating the idea of meaning, of sense, appearing just in the middle of the dialectical relationship with context. In this scheme, we try to visualize the combination of the complex variables where the semiotic genetic processes are located and originated. It starts from the causes and events that in the world of life affect the body, which follows a set of sensory and perceptual processes leading to the semiotization of the world, of the subject, and of his relationship with others. It is also shown that the intervention of contextual variables determines different senses. Vivences and experiences are developed on polemological levels, on conflicts, whose dialectical and tensional character points toward construction processes and balance breaking. A polemological semiotic should be based on experiential and concomitant memorial processes that are born there and return there. In the experience, let's talk about an example that all of us have had in one way or another. Let's talk about the visitors Calvin to the pediatrician. Let's talk about in general of people visiting a doctor and look there how this tensional relationship, this polemological relationship occurs between a patient and doctor. In the experience of a medical consultation, for example, one could say that the patient leaves a pre-tension stage when he organizes speech about symptoms, discomfort, or fatigue, which precisely will take him to visit the doctor. He lives in a tense stage in the interaction with the doctor and with the technological instruments used by him to obtain information about the symptoms. The tension also related to the fact that both the patient and the doctor know that they have a limited time to interact, usually 15 minutes, and consequently the exchange information will be subject to that pressing constraint. Finally, the patient leaves a post-tension stage when he finds an answer to the interpretation and definition of the meaning of those symptoms and suffering that he did not know or could not interpret. It is not only about processes of an emotional nature, but essentially of a semiotic nature. Given the inability to perform a final interpretive process, the patient wonders what is the meaning of the symptoms and discomfort that manifest in his body. In this complex experiential process, symbolic and interactive, between two subjects, doctor and patient, actively intervene the constitutive knowledge of memories of both. On the one hand, there is the knowledge that the patient has of his own body and of the estimated signs and symptoms as out of normal, maybe even the previous information he has about the doctor, either because he has consulted him before or because someone has recommended him. On the other hand, there is the doctor's knowledge memory, his training, B, his previous knowledge of the patient, C, his experience with patients with similar signs and symptoms, D, the technical medical knowledge provided by the analysis and tests that the technological resources contribute, the stethoscopic or whatever machine the doctor uses. Interpretive operations are involved in all these tensional processes whose origin is found in different codes set of signs that should facilitate adequate interpretation conducive to right decisions. A cure of the patient could lead to a resolution of the tension or increase it if the proposed medical solution fails. Signs and symptoms of malaise are codified semiotic processes known in medical sciences as semiology, which require thorough interpretive operation, as the polysemic character of the symptoms make correct interpretation difficult, since a symptom can be a manifestation of different disease. What does this example of experience, tightly summarized here, teach us about the semiogenesis? In our opinion, it teaches us at least how this continuous dialectic operates between experience, memories, new experience. A dialectic where science operation intervene, operation of interpretation and reinterpretation, in which semiotic processes are carried out that cover sensitive, perceptual, and memorial aspects, marked by union, separation of differences that lead to selection operations, as we saw in the model that I just presented before. Experience and vivencies. I'm incorporating the term vivencies that I didn't found in English language, but I think you can understand because in Latin language like Spanish or Italian, vivencies appears a lot, like in vivencia in Spanish. The semiotic of experience will benefit from the introduction of a dialectical distinction between experience and vivency. For Schut and Lickman, the meaning of the first is, I quote, is rather the result of my explanation of past vivency that are reflexively captured from a current now and from a currently valid reference scheme. End of quote. By differentiating these two concepts, the author emphasized that, I quote, the vivencies acquire meaning for the first time when they are explained post hoc and become understandable to me as experience, well circumscribed, end of quote, which puts the vivencies in the domain of a first interaction, concrete, present, while experience is in the domain of memory, an accumulative collection linked to the past tense. Thus, we could conclude that the vivency would be closer to the individual, situational, present and particular processes, while experience would be more in the domains of the social, past, general, and common. The successive vivencies and their successive articulation of sense feed the wealth of experience, which in turn serve as the referential scheme for the interpretation of new or repeated vivencies. I mean, with respect to the first, the collection of experience lends an interpretive hypothesis. With respect to the second, it gives interpretive confirmation. In this way, we can define experience as a process of generating lived sense in the multiple dynamic and dialectical vivencies and experiences that occur in relationship between subjects and the world. It is in the semiosis field where vivencies and experiences, meanings and senses constantly articulate and re-articulate, where they look for their mobile and transitory equilibrium between permanence and change. So, to the initial question, why do experiential processes interest semiotics? We propose a response based on the first semiotization principle of the world. Every process, every phenomenon, every object has a semiotic dimension. All aspects of the world of life, be it natural or cultural, alive or dead, past or present, social or individual, human or animal, they have a semiotic dimension. They simply cannot not have it. Besides the analysis that precedes, according to which the semiosis finds its effective realizations in the vivencies and experiences, and thanks to a dialectical processes between text and context, between differences and similarities, between forgetfulness and memories, a second principle is derived according to which it is in those mentioned processes where the sense is permanently built and where it finds its temporary fullness. In the analytical and theoretical journey, we have tried to re-articulate concepts as experience, body, and signification, so that on the one hand we show the relevance of the relation and interdependencies, and on the other the notion of context without which the meaning does not exist. Such concepts are key in the constitution and development of the semiotic of the experience, at least in my opinion. The results show how the experientiation phenomena are not nurtured by a dynamic, complex processes where body, memory, and sense are inseparably tributaries of intra and extra-textual context. Grazie mille.